December 24th, 2024. The cold sweeps through the city streets. People sing carols on the corners and pretend that everything is fine. But I know that's not true. Even during these festive times, the shadow of crime and corruption lurks around every corner. So I must remain vigilant and with a cool head that's not drowned in... Holiday Punch, were you talking to me?
Well, yes, if not to whom. It's just that you were looking at the window and into the void.
Oh, that is just that.
I look more cinematic this way. But the Christmas spirit comes in. I even bought a little tree for the office with my own money. Where do you get money if I don't pay you? Well, if I walk, sometimes the bus comes out. I'll do a little more every day. But do you want us to work on Christmas? 3 ghosts are going to appear at night. Besides, there hasn't been a single crime, war, or tragedy today. I mean, aren't you happy as a human being?
Pleasure. How am I supposed to be pleased when we live off of misfortune?
Of others, wouldn't you rather write your own jokes first?
Besides, there's always the pile of unsolved crimes. We're sure to find something here. Let's see. Here's one. In recent years, various fictional characters who were formerly redheads have been adapted to other media differently, as they have been replaced by African descendant actors and actresses Jimmy Olsen, Bad Girl, The Little Mermaid, April O'Neil. In short, there are many social media posts wondering why redheads are being replaced. Today, I, Detective Go, the Geek Monitor, will get to the bottom of this.
And
I, the young, indebted, and dismayed, and join me in solving this case which I call the Death.
Red Christmas special of this year.
It's a common internet joke that Hollywood hates redheads due to many being replaced in various productions. But have you ever wondered why there were so many redheads in the first place?
Yes, it's true.
Think about this. Redheads are somewhat common around the world. It's estimated that only 2-4% of the US population are redheads.
This is because their hair color is the result of a recessive mutation in the MC1R gene. My Chemical Romance?
For someone to be born a redhead, they must inherit 2 copies of the redhead gene, one from each parent. The question we should ask ourselves is, does this percentage of redheads in the population more or less match the number of redheads there were in the comics? Let's do a little informal experiment to check it out. I know it's Christmas, but don't worry. I had the distraught young man analyze dozens and dozens of comics from the 30s to the 50s, when many of these characters were created, so he could count the number of characters there were and find the percentage of redheads. It was hard, but we did it, distraught young man.
We did it. Sounds like a lot of people, Detective. You're right, I did it. Let's take a look at the results. According to the data we obtained,
redheads accounted for about 15% of all comic characters at that time, despite representing only 2-4% of the US population. In contrast, African descendants were rarely seen in comics, even though they made up around 10% of the US population.
It is
True, in most of the comics I reviewed, there wasn't even one.
So the question is not only why there were so many redheads, but also why there were so few African descendants. Let's first answer the redhead question. If you take a look at the comics from the 30s to the 50s, you'll realize that the drawing was very simple. In many panels, there wasn't even a background, and the character design was very simple. Remember, those were different times, and a cartoonist's job was also different. Being an economical product aimed at children, companies really didn't care much about the quality of the material. So it was normal for a single cartoonist to illustrate several pages.
to give an example, Jack Kirby produced between 3 and 6 pages a day, a work pace that is not demanded today.
But for the same reason, they were usually simpler pieces. Jack Kirby, the king of comics, delivered gems like this even under precarious conditions. Worse than those of the distraught young man, I don't know why he's complaining. The illustrators of that time worked at a forced pace. That's why many characters looked physically similar, and the easiest way to differentiate them was through clothing and, above all, hair color.
If we start to think that there really aren't many hair colors, we understand why there used to be so many redheads in comics.
Because it was the simplest way to appear diverse in these fictional worlds.
Yes, fictional with my salary. What did you say? And what a nice outfit, Detective. Thanks for noticing.
Hey!
But then if they wanted the characters to stand out, why aren't there more African descendants in the old comics? As I said, the world was a place
Very different.
We often believe that discrimination and racism are age-old issues. However, when Superman and Batman were created in the late 30s, racial segregation in schools and public spaces was still allowed by the government.
In that society, for instance, it was common to have separate bathrooms for whites and blacks.
They could be denied service in restaurants, prohibited from renting houses, and barred from attending the same schools or even sitting in certain places.
The norm for those times then was for these citizens to be considered of a lower category.
So creating an African descendant character in those years would have been considered a highly political act.
It wouldn't have been a character anymore. These were topics writers and illustrators prefer to avoid. It wasn't until almost 30 years later, in 1964, that discrimination based on race and color was banned in public and workspaces. And by this time, characters like the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, or Hulk already existed.
Think about the fact that your grandparents probably had to live in this world.
Which tells us that it's not as far away as we think.
But was it forbidden to put Afro-descendants in the
Comics? Not directly. In those times, cinema, television, and comics were regulated by codes like the Hays or Comic Code, which censored topics related to sex, government corruption, or violence. While these codes didn't explicitly forbid the presentation of African Americans, a clause about maintaining good taste and morality was used to restrict their representation, raising questions about the definition of good taste and morality.
Giving a salary is appropriate. Though ambiguous, a good story illustrates this.
This groundbreaking comic, long censored for its controversial content, follows astronaut Tarleton's mission to the distant planet Cybrinia to assess its readiness for joining the Galactic Republic.
Tarleton is greeted by a group of orange robots who give him a tour of their world and show him how sophisticated and advanced their technology is. However, Tarleton knew that on this planet there were orange and blue robots, so he asked about it.
The orange guide said that the blues lived in another part of the planet, but that he would gladly take him there. And during the tour, Tarleton was able to confirm that the oranges lived with more privileges and discriminated against the blues even though they were built exactly the same way, except for the color of the metal. In the end, Tarleton determined that, despite their technology, Cybrinia's society had not yet evolved enough to join the Galactic Republic. In the last panel, Tarleton removes his helmet, revealing that he is an African descendant man, and we see his sweat shine on his skin like the stars in space.
Keep in mind that this comic was written in 1958, when racial segregation was still legal in the United States.
And even though there wasn't an explicit law that prohibited the company from publishing this comic, a judge from the Comics Code determined that the story was immoral and demanded the company to change Tarleton's skin color.
The editor of the story refused because this revelation at the end was the point of the comic, threatened to sue, and in the end the judge gave in.
However, he demanded that at least they remove the sweat from the last panel. It was published that way until years later, when it was reprinted uncensored.
Wow, it was really difficult to use Afro-descendants in that era.
Firstly, because you could get into trouble with one of the censorship bodies of the time if they felt that the story did not conform to good morals.
A problem that most cartoonists simply omitted. Fortunately, this was changing. A very emblematic case is that of Stan Lee, who not only created the first African descendant superhero of one of the mainstream comic companies, I'm referring to Black Panther in 1966, but also asked his cartoonists to include African descendant people in the crowds and backgrounds of the comics to reflect a more realistic diversity. Gradually, characters like Luke Cage and Jon Stewart were being integrated. But the fact that segregation was illegal at this point in history does not mean that discrimination no longer existed. Neil Adams, the creator of Jon Stewart, had to fight with his editor to create the character with the desired skin color, as the editor insisted on making the skin lighter.
And why does the specific color of the character matter so much?
Apparently, the editors thought that lighter-skinned African Americans were more pleasing to the eye. Something that still happens in several comics where the skin color of many characters is lightened.
It's a new level
of racism that I hadn't considered. Actually, in that case, it's called colorism. Well, if we're already making up words, do you know the one about aguinaldismo? Discrimination against those who don't receive a Christmas bonus.
Let's divert. The point is that comics have always needed diversity.
For starters, so that the characters don't look so much alike. But also to give this illusion of the real world.
We've seen that in the past, due to cultural issues and censorship, it was simpler to use redheads than African descendants to simulate diversity.
Something that doesn't happen nowadays, so it's now more common to find people of African descent in comics, movies, and series.
But the question remains, why change the redheads specifically? As always, it has to do with money, typical.
Recent studies like the 2024 Diversity Report from the University of California have shown that diverse casts sell more movie tickets because they attract a larger audience.
And remember, what these companies want is to sell.
But then, how do you explain the hate towards the Little Mermaid? There's an important point in this report. It indicates that even though diversity does sell, people still enjoy seeing white protagonists in the stories more. And perhaps that's why many movies change the skin color of many of their characters.
Just not the central one.
It's much simpler to present a Jimmy Olsen or a fat African descendant commissioner than a Superman or a Batman. These characters do generate some controversy, but it's nothing compared to central characters like the Little Mermaid or Snow White.
And why does it often coincide with redheads?
I think it has to do with the fact that from the beginning, many of the redheads in comics were created as supporting characters.
An alternative that stood out from the white protagonist with black, brown, or blonde hair.
It's not always the case. Obviously, there were also many red-headed protagonists, but I think it did set a trend.
Like Daredevil, for instance, but if you observe, it occurred.
There's something curious about him. Didn't you go get the suspect's prints? I can't afford it anymore. I spent it all on the little tree. I mean, I say, if you want, give me money and I'll go. No, I think this time we leave it like that. I don't have much money left.
In the comics, Matt Murdock has red hair.
However, Charlie Cox's version is not. The same goes for Jim Gordon and his Gary Oldman version. However, there were no complaints about it, even though the hair color is clearly different.
That means, yes, what really seems to matter to people is not the hair color, but the skin color.
And the physical characteristics associated with this skin color?
When the Titans series was announced, actress Anna Diop faced heavy criticism on social media for being cast as Starfire, a character with red hair and orange skin in the comics.
But if you notice, Anna Diop's Starfire was also a redhead.
What was the problem? The skin color. Oh, what a consternation. Why not hire an orange-skinned actress? But don't you think this controversy could be avoided if new characters were created instead of changing the ones that already exist? You're very right here. Of course, what I don't have is straw. But
the film industry today is risk-averse, resulting in theaters mostly showing sequels, spin-offs, or reboots of previously successful ideas. The same happens with comics. Most new characters take on the name or legacy of an already existing character. This means that industries are recycling ideas from other eras. Eras in which almost all characters were white, which forces companies to change the skin color of some of these characters and thus generate better box office results.
all for the
filthy money, it's always been this way.
Previously, stories with only white characters were made because they were profitable and socially acceptable.
Companies change with the times, even though their intention is always to sell.
This could make us think that we live in a post-racial world where discrimination no longer exists, but unfortunately that is not the case. Of course, we have come a long way since those times when using an Afro-descendant person in comics was a whole political discourse. But even today, we continue to discriminate and have very strong prejudices that have to do with the color of people's skin. Just take a look at cases like Anna Diop's, or even you can see all the hate that Miles Morales received when he was initially created, to realize that unfortunately skin color is still very important to us and that discrimination has not disappeared. Which makes me think that we are still more similar to Sabrina than we usually believe. Before leaving, organize all paperwork alphabetically, excluding June and those marked with pink post-its.
In row 100. Yes, but can I talk to you for a moment? I understand we've worked together for a while, but you haven't paid me anything yet. I need the money and was wondering if you've considered giving me a bonus for my work.
Yes, I do have something for... Yes, we just need to remove... We just need to give it a quick wash and it's good.
Merry Christmas? A cup? Yes. About Caifanes? You're right. I have the grumpy face of an old man. I don't even like Caifanes. Besides, I bought you that mug on Employers' Day. Then I discovered Employers' Day isn't even a real holiday. Well, traditions have to start somewhere. I thought, did you know this isn't working anymore? I'm leaving now.
Distraught, wait.
Yes. I think there was a cigarette in the cup. That one is mine. Will you give it back to me?
Yes, sir. I think... Is he mad at me?
What could I possibly want for Christmas? No, I don't know. It's not something as tangible to see.
Although Joe benefits wouldn't be bad.
What could it be that my heart is asking for now? made me stay? Why does it feel so bad to push away? I'm missing something, but I don't know what it is. I'm getting more and more upset. It's not something that can be wrapped up. I realized today I want to feel worth. A cup won't make me feel better. I've decided to listen to the part that makes me stay. I will return to my home. I won't walk away, and I will take the opportunity to go to the supermarket for hot chocolate. Oh yes, I will return. Yeah, whoa. I'll be back by Christmas. I'll come back again.
I will return.
Sorry, I was waiting for someone else. One moment. I know you are. What are you doing here?
You can't interfere. Hey,
It's always been you, hasn't it?
Were you recording me?
Distraught young man, you know him. He's been here from the start.
Distraught young man.
Detective! Detective! Detective!